Wonderful to hear that one of the key components of this day was a name choice, and we were very intentional not to call this a conference. I love the roots of the word conference in terms of confer, but what we really wanted here, we went back to the old Greek-themed word symposium, which really was a drinking party. Now today we're drinking tea and other beverages, but the idea, the atmosphere of a party, the atmosphere of celebration is here today, and it's so glad to see so many of you making new connections and catching up with new friends, new colleagues, and having an opportunity for some interdisciplinary exploration. We certainly hope that this will be the beginning of a conversation and not the end of one, so I'm so glad to see that during the brief lunch period we've had so many opportunities for people to check in with one another. And now it's my distinct honor and pleasure to introduce Dean Guy Charles. Dean Charles is the founding director of the Duke Law Center on Law, Race, and Politics. And he is a professor who not only is a world-class scholar and a world-renowned teacher, but he is one of those professors who integrates the understanding of politics, the understanding of the concepts that we in our society have created around this thing that we call race. And he also understands the way in which we socialize with one another and how important it is for each generation of us that wrestle with what it is to be a lawyer and what it is to pursue justice have to do as individuals to make that happen. He is, I think, a great inspiration to us all, and I was very pleased that he was willing to serve as the introducer of our keynote speaker, as he could be a keynote speaker in his own right. But I thank you so much for welcoming him to the podium. Thank you, Dean Charles.
Good afternoon. It is my distinctive pleasure to be with you here this afternoon to introduce our distinguished speaker and to bring greetings from the law school with respect to this extremely important set of issues. What is particularly inspiring to me is the relationship and the connection that has been made today between civil rights and environmental justice. I think for many of us, myself included, and I think of myself as an academic who writes about civil rights issues, for too long, at least in my field, in my domain, we've not sufficiently connected the relationship between equality and environmental justice. Though for many of you, including our distinguished speaker, Ms. Catherine Coleman Flowers, it has been the heart of her work. And part of what I have learned, part of what has inspired me, is seeing people at the forefront of this movement that have connected and recognized the importance of acknowledging that fighting for environmental justice is also fighting for civil rights. I understand that Ms. Coleman Flowers has already been introduced, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on her bio. But what I think is fascinating and inspiring for me is the impact that her work has had directly on the lives of so many different people. And it's the recognition that equality, that justice, that rights, that law are all interconnected, and they're interconnected for all people. And part of what we try to do here at the law school is to bring all of those concepts and questions together. And I am particularly pleased that we have an amazing environmental law and environmental justice faculty here at the law school. They are leaders, not just locally, not just nationally, but internationally on a range of issues that connect environmental law, environmental justice, and the role that law has to play. And they are an inspiration to our law students because it provides them with an opportunity to understand that there can be purpose in law, that law can be used not simply to rearrange a set of circumstances, but to make fundamental change in the lives of people. And I've been inspired by their work, and I'm grateful to them for doing this here at the law school and really putting us on the map in so many different ways. And I'm inspired by our speaker that we are so delighted to have here today because she embodies and represents the way that an equality frame, that civil rights frame in the 21st century can really make a fundamental difference in the lives of individuals. Not respecting the boundaries of socioeconomic status, not respecting the boundaries of geography, not respecting the boundaries of race, but working across all of those boundaries and make a difference in the lives of others, especially those who do not have access to these types of places, to speak on their behalf, to be their representative, to understand their plight, and to articulate a framework for fundamental change. We are delighted to have her here at the law school, and I would like for you to join me once again in welcoming our distinguished keynote speaker, Ms. Catherine Flowers. Please.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon. First, I'm going to apologize because I'll probably cough. I used to work in North Carolina years ago, and I noticed that this time of the year, I've just made the connection today, this time of the year, I would start responding to whatever allergens that are in the air. And 3 weeks ago when I was here is when I first started having these experiences. And now that I'm back, they're coming back in full force again. So I think that something that's indigenous to the area, I don't know if it's air quality or whether it's plants or whatever, I'm starting to deal with that. But I'd like to thank Ryke and the Environmental Justice Law Clinic for inviting me here. And I'd like to also thank Professor Charles for that kind introduction. And I just feel that as a young person, as a person growing up in Lowndes County, Alabama, I'm quite humbled by the opportunity to be here at this space at this time, and I understand and recognize the importance of it because it has shown how far we have come. And when I talk about the experiences that I've had and this work that I'm doing as it relates to environmental justice, I cannot get away from my background as a history teacher. So I'm going to start with some history. Well, first of all, I live in Montgomery, Alabama. Everybody knows that history. Montgomery is connected to the modern day civil rights movement because of Rosa Parks when she decided that, and that was the second time she decided that she was not going to get up and give up her seat. And she was one of many, but it was her move, her valiant effort that particular day that she was not going to get up that led to what is now termed as the modern day civil rights movement. However, going back, I work for the Equal Justice Initiative, and I don't know how many of you know who Brian Stevenson is, but to be able to have the opportunity to work with Brian, who articulates these kinds of things in such a clear way that everybody can understand. And if you have not read his book, Just Mercy, please read it. But Brian was has this vision of how we recognize people who were killed during the era of racial terror in this country. And as a result, is building the first ever lynching memorial that is going to be dedicated the week of April 25th of this year in Montgomery, Alabama. And one of the things that, as part of the research that was done, our offices there at the Equal Justice Initiative, the building was a slave-holding pen. At the end of, in the Constitution, they ended the importation of slaves at a certain period of time. I'm here with my friend Lenise Manuel, who is from Pritchard, Alabama, which was Africatown. And some of you may have read recently the story of the Clotilda, where this person went to a nation in Africa and brought back slaves, and there was a shipwreck, and then there was a case where it was determined that he illegally brought them into the country, and then they established the town of Uniontown. Excuse me, the town of Africatown, which is also known as Pritchard. So with that history, after they ended the importation of slaves, then there became this large domestic slave trading business that boomed. And Montgomery was one of those places. I mean, we hear about Charleston, we hear about New Orleans, but Montgomery was also one of those places. And people were brought into Montgomery by way of the Alabama River, and then they were taken down Commerce Street, which is where EJI's office is located, and taken to the Court Square, where they were auctioned off and went to places throughout what is now called the Black Belt. Lowndes County was one of those places. And that's where a lot of my forefathers, that's how they came to Alabama from the Carolinas. Actually, the people who founded Alabama came from South Carolina, North and South Carolina. I've done the 23andMe DNA test. I've also done the Ancestry.com DNA test. And I could see clear relations actually from Virginia all the way down to Alabama, and in some cases over to Texas. But what I'm saying all this to put this in context, because we have developed certain constructs based on an inaccurate telling of histories, or just denying that these histories even exist, that are playing out today in the environmental justice movement. And there's a direct correlation and connection between inadequate infrastructure that exists now, and even the fact that a president who can name countries that where people of color come from, and want to know why people can't come from the other countries. And yet, all of this is playing out, and it is still playing out in his infrastructure principles and the infrastructure package that he's putting forth. So I'm going to tie all of this together. But anyway, when in terms of EJI and its mission and documenting all this information, when people come to my area and they want to understand the wastewater problem, I take them to EJI first. EJI embarked on a project where it sought to document lynchings throughout the South. And in documenting those lynchings, there was information that was collected on each of them, and then we went to the sites or the proximate sites where the lynchings took place, and we collected the soils. Those soils, of course, probably have so many stories to tell that they could talk. Those soils were the reasons that people came from the Carolinas and founded Alabama in the first place. Those soils were the reasons that we had plantations there. Those soils are the very same reasons why now the on-site septic systems do not work. And we tend to discount that when we start talking about infrastructure and environmental justice in the natural world. And what we have to learn how to do is to look at all the different kinds of wisdom that we have that currently exists that can lead to us finding solutions, because we tend to discount it based on who it's coming from. And clearly, if we were, when I grew up in Lowndes County, everybody had a guard. Part of when we went to, before we physically moved to Lowndes, my father's a native of Lowndes County. Before we physically moved to Lowndes County, we would go and visit, and I'm sure this is true of the culture in rural communities in North Carolina too. When we would go and visit, everybody had a guard, and you left with some vegetables that they had grown themselves. And now people have been taught to not do that anymore, and that's why we have food deserts and the kind of illnesses that are existing right now. And those people that do that think that that's something new that just started, and it's not. And likewise, as we look at indigenous culture, and I was sharing earlier that I used to teach at Hope County High School. And when I taught at Hope County High School, a lot of my students were part of a tribe that's not even federally recognized, but if they were federally recognized, they would be the largest tribe east of the Mississippi River. And I would meet people that would tell me how, farmers who would tell me that, they said, you know, that people were, when we imagined the settlements and who was here when the Europeans came, we just assumed that nobody was here. But there were villages all up and down this coast with people that had been here thousands of years. Actually, before they even started bringing in African slaves here, actually, when I was working on my master's degree and studying indigenous history, that one of the writers talked about how they actually tried to take slaves from South Carolina to one of the Caribbean islands and have them work there, but either they married into the population or they they died, and when that didn't work, then they started bringing in African slaves. So there is a combined history there. So as we talk about environmental justice, we have to look at intersectionality. And the intersectionality of it all is that what is happening in indigenous communities now, the battles are all connected. Somehow out of this, we have to find a way to work together. We have to find a way to work together because these histories are connected. So in Lowndes County, Alabama, there's a place called Holy Ground. Holy Ground was a location where the Creeks, and if you know anything about the Creek Wars, you know, that was part of the so-called Indian removal policy when they moved people from the so-called settled areas and moved them out west and to put them on reservations. And in Lowndes County, it was the Creeks and the Choctaws lived in that area. But in Holy Ground was an area that it was believed that white people could not penetrate that area, and as a result, there was a settlement there of men, women, and children. But what people don't know is that it was black people and Indian people that lived together there at that settlement. And then that particular battle that took place was one of the final battles in the Creek Wars. And we have to reclaim that history. And when we go, I go to Holy Ground quite a bit. I go to Holy Ground quite a bit because there are indigenous plants to the areas that are indigenous to the, plants that are indigenous to the area that are still there. Is a place of peace. And as part of my role with the Climate Speakers Network, we did a climate training there, and I suggested that we have an earth honoring ceremony there. Every time we do any event, we do an earth honoring ceremony to, first of all, not only honor Mother Earth, but the people that were there before we got there, because we know we're on grounds that were taken. So as a result, we decided we were going to do this. And this event, I think Bryce Cracknell was there that morning when people came from around the state, because people thought that that was something that people would not support. But people were there from around the state as we stood there at Holy Ground, and the ceremony was led by two people that are spiritual leaders in their community. And we took soil with our hands, and we held it in our hands with our eyes closed. Of course, we acknowledged the directions and so forth. And we were, as we went through the ceremony, I started noticing things. I started noticing that the dirt seemed to move in my hands. I actually got to the point, one time it felt like it was a heartbeat. And then after that, the birds started singing overhead. And we could literally hear the fish jumping out of the water. It was so powerful. And we realized it was a sacred place. And those people, and then as we proceeded through the ceremony, Lila June Johnson, some of you may know, is also an activist. And Lila is Danae, and Lila asked everybody to acknowledge who you are. She said, this is a time because she said there are a lot of Native voices that are here that are not given the opportunity to speak. And as we went around the circle, people started naming the tribes whose blood or DNA they carried. It was such a powerful, powerful unification ceremony that set the stage for the rest of the day. And I reflect on all of that because as we talk about environmental justice, we talk about water and sanitation, I think one of my lessons, my personal lessons around this, is not only what I learned in Lowndes County, which is the home of the original Black Panther Party. It was not in Oakland, well, not founded in Oakland, California. It was founded in Lowndes County. For those that don't believe me, read Bloody Lowndes by Hassan Jeffries, who's a Duke alum. But I had the opportunity to work with Hassan when he was actually researching this book. And everybody that's working on this project that's working with us here at Duke University, that's one of the required readings. They have to read Bloody Lowndes. But all of that's important because as we make these connections and try to solve these problems, we're gonna have to all work together. And earlier I mentioned going to Flint, I mentioned going to Standing Rock, and two of the experiences that I wanna draw upon this afternoon and kind of lead to my conclusion in terms of where I think we should go with this and how we can reach solutions is to talk about As part of the New Poor People's Campaign, which is headed by our own Reverend Barber here in North Carolina, I'm on their national steering committee. So Cherie Fortland, who would have been here today, but Cherie, I think, has the flu. But I really wish she could have been here because I had the opportunity, where I met Cherie, they kind of threw us together. We were like Thelma and Louise in a car going through West Virginia, Kentucky, and Tennessee, going into communities that were formerly coal mining communities, where they are practicing something that I think is sacrilegious, blowing the tops off mountains. And I mean, to see this and to see that they had signs up about falling rock, and then they tried to put up trees to block it so that most people traveling on the highways don't see that. And people were talking to us about how when they light the water, it burns. And they had to drink this. And how these people were coming into their towns and dividing families that had owned land for years. And they said they could always tell when somebody sold out because they would show up at the bank and be driving a Mercedes-Benz. But those are the kinds of disruptions that are happening in communities over extraction, but it's also destroying the people's livelihoods. We went to one place, I think it was called Capers Mountain, and on that mountain, you can see where these families had settled there for generations. They couldn't live there anymore. The area was so poisoned, you didn't even see bugs move on the ground. But the people were so tied to the land that when they died, they wanted to be buried there. So they had a family cemetery that was still there. But when they came to the area, they had to bring their own water because you couldn't drink the water from the area. And you can go, they took us to this summit where you can look out on the other side. You can see the river down below. And on the other side, they had blown the top off of a mountain. And they said downstream was an elementary school. And there were so many people that were sick in that area. And one of the things I said to them, when we were in West Virginia, I said, your struggle is the same as our struggle. The only difference is that you're poor and white, and the people that I represent are poor and black. And at some point, we have to find a way to bridge this to fight together, because at the end of the day, we all need access to water. And then after that, Cherie called me up, because I was real despondent over the election, November 2016. And she called me up and she said, Catherine, do you want to go to Standing Rock? So I went to Standing Rock with her. We actually left the day after the election and traveled to Bismarck. We flew into Bismarck, and then we went out to where the encampment was there on the Cannonball River. And there I had another experience. First of all, I saw the military or militarized police using weapons that are used usually in war against peaceful activists. I saw stuff that I didn't even know they had in the United States to use against people that were his own citizens. And what was even very dangerous about this is that these were people that wanted to bring a pipeline through an area that was a water source. I mean, that's similar to what I was seeing in West Virginia. It was a water source for that community. And they were supposed to take it to another part, but those people were a little bit more affluent, and they said, no, you can't come through our community. So they tried to take it through the community they thought were not as powerful. But one of the things that I saw at Standing Rock, again, I always look at commonality. I saw reflections of my own upbringing. I saw where we went, there was a place at Standing Rock, there was a campfire, there was like the center of all the camps, because there were various camps there, because there were tribes from around the world that were represented at Standing Rock. And at this campfire was kind of like the center place where everybody would meet. And there, everybody was referred to as relatives. Now, I come from a rural perspective. You know, for those of us that are from the country, as we call it, whenever somebody came to my house, my parents wanted to know, my dad in particular, who are your folk? And likewise, I saw the same thing at Standing Rock. And everybody was a relative. I said, because when you go to Lowndes County, one of the things you're going to find out about me, I'm kin to everybody there. But that was, I saw that commonality. And then as we stood around the campfire and we were singing and dancing, I started, and people were, the Lakota Sioux was singing in their language. And when they started to sing, you know, and I reflected on this a lot because it was so moving to me. It's to me, for those of you that grew up in the Black church, especially the Baptist church, you know, we do a lot of call and response. And they started singing a song that sounded to me, they were singing in their language, but to me it sounded like they were saying, "A charge to keep I have, a God to glorify." And it was so moving that it brought me to tears. And the next day I participated in a water ceremony. The water ceremony, one of the things about Standing Rock that people don't know, it was run by women. I mean, young people were behind it, but the women, I mean, a lot of people don't know that in indigenous communities, a lot of indigenous communities are matrilineal societies. And it was run by women, and the elders were the ones that were performing the water ceremony. And they had water that they had collected from around the world. And so when I went there, and it was early that morning at the Cannonball River, and there's kind of an incline going down to the river. And as I went down this incline to participate in the ceremony, there were people on either side of me, and they were helping each of us going down, and everybody was saying, "Thank you for being here. Thank you for being here." It was so powerful. And what Standing Rock did for me was gave me hope. And those of you that heard me talk, the reason I do this work, and I travel quite a bit, and the reason I'm here coughing is because of a 2-year-old little boy named King Josiah Hutt, who is my grandson. And one of the things that I learned about Standing Rock, and my parents are always telling me, you know, you always gotta look out for the family, you gotta prepare for the family. But I learned, Standing Rock put it in context for me, and it was restated here this morning, is that we have to prepare for 7 generations to come. If we don't prepare for 7 generations to come, we're doomed. We're doomed. And I do this so that my grandson, if he decides to move to West Virginia, that he can have access to clean water and clean air. I'm doing this so that pipelines won't be more important than water. I'm doing this because we all need to realize that if you're not dealing with this today, I think that was Angela Davis that said, if they come to me, come for me today, they're gonna come for you in the morning. And I'm gonna close with, I was invited to the Aspen Institute's, to their, they had a summit this past summer on, actually it was cold there, so it had to be like May or June. It was still cold to me, but when we got there, you know, I read about the Aspen Institute because I didn't know who they were. I'm from Lowndes County. So when I got there, I started seeing all these pictures, and they said, we're gonna meet in the Koch building. The Koch building? I mean, as in Koch brothers? So, you know, and as people introduced themselves, and they were there talking about water. And when they started introducing themselves, and they said they were from Monsanto, Nestle, the people that's draining the water in California, Big Ag, that's taking so much water that in some places the ground is starting to sink because they're taking all the groundwater. So they were there for the purpose of trying to come up with a strategy for how to monetize and quantify groundwater. Now, people may think, oh, that's those Indians out there and Standing Rock and they complaining and blah, 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 and it's not gonna happen to me because I'm in Durham, North Carolina, and we're too progressive for that, and they're not gonna come and do that stuff with us. But what is happening, there's a scheme underway for these big companies, and get a copy of the president's infrastructure plan. Because what he's proposing in that plan, for you to get the money to upgrade your infrastructure, you're gonna have to partner with private enterprise, these private companies. And if Detroit doesn't teach you anything else, go and look at the water affordability issues they're having there. They were talking about cutting off thousands of people, cutting them off water in Detroit. You know it's cold, they're expecting a snowstorm there now. But they don't care because they don't have a conscience. And if we let it happen at Standing Rock, and we let it happen in these poor towns in West Virginia, and we let it happen in Lowndes County, Alabama, it's going to happen here. Because it's going to get to a point when they make water such a commodity, and the people that were there were people like American Water, when they make it such a commodity that they don't care whether or not it's cold and you need water, and you can't pay the bill, and they're going to turn it off. At least in these small towns where it's controlled by people from the community, they're not going to turn off the water when it's cold. They're not going to turn it off when it's very hot. In our communities, even in Montgomery now, if it's very cold, they can't turn your heat off. But what happens when corporations take control and they're concerned more about how much money they're going to make instead of the impact it's going to have on people? We saw that in Flint. So those are the reasons why we need to be concerned and get involved in the environmental justice movement, because at the end of the day, environmental justice impacts all of us, not just people of color. And I tell people that all the time. If you're in Lowndes County, Alabama, and you buy a house there, build a house, and that raw sewage is running back into the home, that soil doesn't care whether you're black, white, or went to Duke University or Alabama State University. The same thing is going to happen, and that's why we have to work together. I'm very thankful to the partnership that I have with Duke University. Without the people here at Duke, a lot of the work that we're doing, we wouldn't be able to do. 4 years ago, they saw something that other people are just starting to see, and they saw this was an opportunity where students could be engaged and be involved in community. And sometimes we were in disagreement about how we do that, but people listen, and I appreciate that. And now we have a relationship with their students that have been going into Lowndes County for years now, and understand that people there that may not have degrees from Duke or degrees from anywhere, some of them may not even be high school graduates, but the fact that they live in that community, they have something to bring as it talks about how do we deal with this water and sanitation issue. As a result, the Alabama Center for Rural Enterprise has decided to evolve. We want to institutionalize this because this is something new and different in terms of how we seek solutions and how we bring together all of these various partners to work together on finding solutions. You know, I just don't subscribe to the people pimping kind of mentality, but there are some folk that don't want a solution. They want us fighting each other every day for the rest of our lives so they can have a platform. I don't subscribe to that. I think that what we have created here at Duke University, despite Duke's history and some of the things that Duke is struggling with now, I think that we have a template that we can teach Duke how to be more equal and deal with the inequality that exists here, but also through what we're learning in Lowndes County can be very, very applicable in so many different ways. So out of this relationship with Duke, we've developed this rural paradigm. And this rural paradigm is how to engage in rural communities. We've learned that you can't just go and knock on the door in Lowndes County. I think Omega talked about that. You just don't show up like that. You got to show up with somebody you know from the community that they know. I can't do it, and I'm from there and kin to everybody, but I got to I'll call somebody in that community and say, do you know so-and-so? I would like to meet them. Can you take me over there? That's the way we show up. And then when we show up, if you smell raw sewage, you got to pretend like you don't smell it. You have to sit there and listen. Just ignore that part of it, because otherwise you're going to miss a lot of things that are necessary to help you solve those problems. And the students, through their various skills, are helping us to map out. For an example, we did a wastewater study where we went from house to house. That data now is being mapped out in such a way that anybody, these engineers that are working on solutions, can use this to help them. They don't have to go back and wait and get this done. Students are making this happen. They're researching the political history of the area. There's a timeline that's being put together that's telling the environmental justice history of that community, and then it has it in a larger context. We're having a meeting March 23rd in Washington, and that meeting, the students are going to get the opportunity to present to policymakers, because out of this, even when Senator Booker reached out to me, he said, what kind of policy do we need? And I think that that's where the knowledge in this room can be very, very helpful in shaping that kind of policy. Earth Justice, who is a representative here, they send me bills that people are writing, and I go through these bills and I look at them and say, look, This bill is written where it has to have a population of 12,000 or more people. You're leaving out a lot of these people in these rural communities. Or the bill is written in such a way saying that it goes to municipalities. You need to take that language out. So out of that, we're developing a rural lexicon. How do you talk in country talk? You know, how do you talk? How do we take that and put it in policy where it doesn't leave out most of this country? Most of this country is in fact rural. The two most rural states in this country goes back and forth between Maine and Vermont. And clearly, what we're learning here can be used to help those areas. So ACRE is trying to establish a center for rural enterprise that we hope will be located here at Duke, and we'll be able to institutionalize what we're doing and those institutions around the country, because this is not just a Lowndes County problem, it's not just a North Carolina problem, that those institutions can come and study what we do, and maybe if they don't take all of it, take parts of what we do, and be able to implement these best practices in their community to reach solutions. And out of this, we have started a wastewater challenge, and in our wastewater challenge, we have brought together groups. Colin Balin, who spoke this morning on the panel, he and I are part of this National Coalition for the Human Right to Water and Sanitation. So when Colin has opportunities, Colin is inviting me, and I'm doing the same thing. We're doing this with all of our water warriors and EJ warriors around the country, trying to share resources and share connections. And one of the connections that he helped me to make was with Engineers Without Borders, who wants to become one of our partners. There was a young woman who was there that Colin introduced me to, who works for NASA. And I often say, you know, if we want to solve this wastewater problem, look at what they're doing in outer space. When they go up in outer space and they use the bathroom, they recycle that and turn that into drinking water quality. Why we can't scale that down and do that here in the United States or do that for other parts of the world? So what she just shared with me, and that the people at NASA want to help us. They have sent me a list of all of the NASA contractors who actually work on wastewater in outer space. And they're trying to set up at the Huntsville Space Flight Center in Huntsville an Engineers Without Borders chapter for the purpose of developing a prototype that we might be able to use in Lowndes County to see that it work. Now, the prototype might not be perfect. We're going to have to get with David Schott and his students to make sure that it's within the regulations and that it's something that can be used in homes and so forth. We also have a partnership with American Standard. American Standard read about what we were doing in the New York Times. And in their research, they found out how to get in touch with us. When they reached out to us, they said that we want to help. Excuse me. They said that we want to have, we're trying to see how we can use our talents to help you. They said we're one of the largest plumbing companies in the world, and their parent company is Lixel, which is located in Germany. So when they reached out to me, I said, well, you can't design for us unless you come to Lowndes County. You have to see this for yourself. So when they actually came to Lowndes County, and they went from house to house, every house that we took them to, they flushed the toilets. They went, you know, they asked people about their bathrooms, because I think initially their narrative was they thought they were going to come down and say, oh, it's the toilets. We just need to sell you our best toilet, and then we can solve this problem. But they found out that, but you know, even with them, I took them to EJI first because I wanted them to see the soil collection, and I told them about the history, and then I took them to Lowndes County. Then they went to people's houses. And after they went to people's houses, they went and met with the health officials from the Alabama Department of Public Health, who probably told them, oh, it's the homeowners. They just don't want to buy these expensive systems, blah, 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 blah. But anyway, when they finally called me, they said, Catherine, we want to apologize for taking so long to get back in touch with you. But we were literally shocked that we saw this in the United States of America. But out of that came a commitment. They have assigned designers and engineers to work on a product that could revolutionize on-site wastewater treatment. And what they are proposing to do, listening to some of the things that we've said, is trying to design a system that would be the equivalent to an HVAC system. You know, when you get an HVAC system, you go to Lowe's or Home Depot and buy it, and you hire a technician to install it in your homes. And that's what they're proposing to do. And they're in the design phase right now. And if that happens, that would change wastewater considerably. That way, we can't come up with infrastructure plans that will put infrastructure in the hands of corporations. It'll put it back in the hands of the homeowner, of local people, and they can make the decisions themselves. So all of this has come about because of our relationship with Duke University. Because what Duke has done for us, despite everything else that's going on around, the people at the Nicholas School, the people at the Franklin Humanities Institute, the people across the campus that have been working with us, the people at the School of Engineering, they have validated the voices of local people. And by validating the voices of local people, people are now paying attention. And out of this, all of this, including our relationship with the Environmental Justice Law Clinic here, are going to come policies. Because what I see all the time, because I'm politically, I'm not a Democrat or Republican. I'll talk to anybody that'll talk to me. And I look for commonality. And I've been in places where the Heritage Foundation was. And one of the things I noticed about them that we don't have for those of us that call ourselves progressives, at the end of a meeting, they have a paper that comes out. And if you look at Fox News, they're talking about it that evening. And their mouthpieces in Congress are articulating that. That's how they can push, even if it's archaic, it is not for the good of the planet or the good of the people in the United States and the rest of the world. That's how they're able to do that. And what we're hoping to do out of this project is to create the kinds of policies that's earth-friendly and humane and take into account human rights. And I appreciate the opportunity to come and share with you this morning. I had to alter my speech since I ended up filling in for somebody this morning. But I wanted to be able to just share a little bit. And I don't know whether there are questions. I didn't talk about the parasite study, but I think that most of you probably already know about that. But I just really appreciate the opportunity to be here and to meet and coalesce and hopefully develop other relationships where we can find these solutions for rural communities across the United States. Thank you so much. Thank you.
And we are going to have now an opportunity to participate in 3 breakout workshop sessions. When you came in, you probably had an opportunity to choose a preference for a workshop